All eyes are on Finance Minister Tito Mboweni today as he delivers his maiden budget speech this afternoon. With an ailing economy, state-owned enterprises in dire straits and a high unemployment rate, the minister is walking a tightrope. Financial assistance to Eskom is expected to take centre stage, but the question remains, where will the money come from, considering that the fiscus is already under pressure? Let's bring in Nompumelelo Siziba, who's live for us in Cape Town for the all-important budget speech. Good afternoon, Nompumelelo. What are we expecting?
Thanks very much, Nzinga. Well, you've very nicely outlined all the challenges that face the Finance Minister Tito Mboweni. He is going to be walking a very tight rope indeed as he tries to ensure that he satisfies all the needs that need to be satisfied. And of course, Eskom is really quite pivotal. It's critical for the economy. If we don't have an Eskom-like type of service, that is the supply of electricity, it has all sorts of ramifications for economic growth. And of course, we felt that last week when we had load shedding. So that really has to be top of the agenda in terms of immediate attention to that. But of course, we've done interviews with civil society organizations which have said that government at the end of the day has to cater for broader society, especially the more vulnerable, and has to address the issues around poverty, inequality and unemployment as well. So it's going to be very difficult for him. But just to give us his perspective on what we can expect on the tax front, I'm joined by Mark Sevitz. He's from SABC, the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. Thanks very much for joining us, Mark. So what can we expect from the Finance Minister come 2 o'clock?
Hopefully no tax increases. I think they might look at some wealth tax, maybe on an increase in dividends or an increase in the capital gains rate, but there's really no room to maneuver. There's no money left to squeeze out of taxpayers, but we've got to pay for Eskom, as you've just said. So we're hoping maybe the sin taxes would go up a bit. I think that's standard. Maybe an introduction of an increase in the capital gains or the dividends rate, and those bracket creeps, which we usually get inflation linked, may not be allowed as much, and so taxpayers won't really feel the inflationary effect, but they won't get a tax increase as such. So maybe that's a good thing, I think.
What about some innovation? I mean, for example, now we have these big firms dominating our markets, the likes of Google, Netflix and so on. Shouldn't there maybe be a tax on them, because there are a lot of South Africans who are consuming these services?
So South Africa is very big on indirect tax and companies like that. So I think it was from August last year where VAT is actually being paid on those services, whereas before it wasn't. So I agree, maybe there's something there that look at those international companies that aren't really servicing here but are providing their services, and maybe there's an element there, but that creates an international problem, and I think South Africa right now wants that foreign investment. There are things afoot to try and earn some money from those type of companies going forward. But yeah, the VAT certainly is something that is bringing some more money to the fiscus.
How much room does the government have to be able to try and tax the wealthy more? Because there is a concern that the more you do that, the more people will use mechanisms to avoid tax.
So something that's being introduced next year is this foreign employment exemption reduction. So already they're looking at something which doesn't really exist anywhere else to say, can we get money that way? But they're sort of short-term mechanisms which don't really increase the growth and therefore don't increase the revenue. So there isn't a lot of space. Maybe a once-off wealth tax, but there again, people may flee South Africa trying to save tax, which is often what happens. So I think the key is to what can government and what can the Treasury and the Ministry do in order to open up the economy a bit more, provide some more growth, and in that way actually earn true tax revenue through growth and not necessarily through the same number of taxpayers who are earning the same amount of money, but they aren't able to actually provide more money as opposed to growth where there's a bigger pool, basically.
So based on what you say, perhaps in the short term we can expect us to go further into debt, given that government will find it quite difficult to raise taxes?
I think if they look at something of an amount for Eskom, maybe for SAA as well, there may be a need in the short term to increase that debt ratio to GDP, which has a lot of negative effects because the interest that we pay is a lot higher. But if there's a proper growth plan, then maybe that can be offset, and that's where the money that's going to be needed for Eskom and some of the parastatals and SOEs are going to come from. So it has to be from growth, short-term pain for a sort of, say, short-term 1 to 2 years maybe for the longer term gain, which is vital for the economy.
Mark Sevitz, thank you very much for your time. He's from the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. It looks as though it's a very sticky place that the Finance Minister is in, and based on what he and other tax practitioners have been telling me today, it does look as though we're perhaps going to have to borrow more money as a nation in order just to be able to pay for the various priorities. In the midterm policy statement that was delivered in October last year, government already did indicate that our debt service costs would be about 15% of their revenue by the 2021-2022 year. That basically means that all the government revenue that is available, it would first have to put aside 15% of that money to settle our interest rate on the debt that we have, which is about 3 trillion rand at the moment. And that was in October that they were estimating that. So if we go further into debt, chances are that debt service cost is going to get bigger. But like Mark says and other people are saying, at the end of the day, this economy needs economic growth. The government needs to ensure that it pulls all the levers to ensure that we get the growth that we need. You get growth, you get job creation, and then you get the resolution of so many other problems. But we have to wait and see what comes out from the minister. Back to you, Nzinga.
Nompumelelo Siziba giving us an update there. She'll continue giving us updates on the Finance Minister's speech and the run-up to that throughout the day. Let's cross